Thanks everybody for coming out today. Really do appreciate it. I know we've got people from all over the world. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, as the case may be. I am Trevor Grant, and I'm going to talk about not only collaborating with the AI Alliance, but just making your first commit to open source projects writ large. And I'm going to be coming at this I have multiple hats. I have my AI Alliance hat, my day job, and the tools and applications that I run, and we're going to use an example project. But I'm also an open source committer, and I've been on multiple projects of various sizes and styles, and I'm going to kind of talk about that too. But this is an overview of what we're going to talk about. I don't want to get ahead of myself too far. Again, we're going to start about me, choosing a project to get involved with. I'm going to brush up on some of the open source politics of getting involved in open source and things like that and why it matters. What the project lead cares about, and when you're doing a PR, a roadmap of getting involved with open source projects, and we're going to review a PR together. Let me take a step back and say too, the idea here was I'm hoping not to take the entire time talking about this. I'm hoping to leave a solid 15 to 30 minutes at the end for people to ask questions. Hopefully you have, looking at the title, either attempted to successfully have or have some interest in making open source commits. And so I want to answer questions as well. So definitely a heavy Q&A period is the plan. So think about things you want to ask about, or hopefully you have ideas, put them in the chat. Hopefully I don't get distracted with them, and we can do questions at the end. So about me, my name is Trevor Grant. I'm a member of the Apache Software Foundation. I'm a PMC, which stands for Project Mentorship Committee, which really just means like a project lead in the Apache Software Foundation on Apache Mahout. I used to be one on Apache Streams, but it was very sadly retired. I was in the Apache Community Development Project. I resigned for reasons, and I used to be a mentor of Apache SDAP, which is a science data and analytics platform, when it was incubating, but it graduated, so they didn't need me as a mentor anymore. That is also a very cool project, which I've been meaning to tell Tim about because I think it would be relevant to his interests. But at any rate, I'm also project lead of a project called GoFanon, which is an AI Alliance project. And I am author of Kubeflow for Machine Learning, From Lab to Production by O'Reilly Media. And if you are looking, it is a great gift to charm your friends and enrage your enemies. And I get about $15 a month in royalties, which buys me about 2 beers locally. I'm from Chicago, which I strongly assert is the best city ever. If you are looking in the background and you know anything about history, United States used to have, in like the 1920s, prohibition where they outlawed all the alcohol. And in Chicago, there was a lot of gang wars. Whenever I travel internationally, I say I'm from Chicago. People always ask, oh, Al Capone, Michael Jordan. And then Al Capone was the prohibition era. This is a speakeasy that was in my basement. When I bought the place, the guy who owned it before me was an alcoholic, so he was just using it for a storage room. When we moved in, we fixed it up, and it is a refurbished speakeasy, and it's pretty cool. And during the winter, I come down here and use it as my personal office. So about my patron, the AI Alliance has already been spoken about, but it's pretty cool. I'm paid. I think IBM Research signs my checks. The operative word here, they believe that I work. I do a lot of open source stuff. I really just have fun. I kind of church it up and make it seem like work so that they don't feel so bad about paying me. But the gist of it is I just have fun and play for the AI Alliance. I don't really work with them. It's a great organization. I definitely recommend you checking it out and learning more. Yeah, but again, we've already talked about that, and time is short. My artistic endeavors, GoFanon. This was a not super great made logo, and Apache Mahout and the QMAT project. GoFanon, we're going to talk about a little bit in this, and we will tangentially talk about Mahout and QMAT. GoFanon is a project. It is a repository of tools for agentic frameworks. It doesn't actually have any, it's got a very, very light, but not production grade and not something you're supposed to run agentic framework. But it integrates and plays nice well with small agents, LangChain. We're starting to do some work to integrate with AWS Bedrock agents and the GCP new agent framework, I think on Vertex. Apache Mahout was the original machine learning on big data, starting on Hadoop, and then moving to Spark, Flink, and H2O. And then recently we pivoted to quantum computing, taking some of the old inherited cool stuff. It's quantum computing. That's is what it is. So if you're interested in either of those things, I highly recommend you reaching out and checking them out. All right. So with that, we're going to get into choosing a project. There are a lot of things to consider when choosing a project to get involved with. You've got large, popular, and established and commercial projects. You've got small, less popular, kind of startup or maintenance mode projects or hobby projects. Examples of large, popular, established are Apache Spark, Kserve, Data Prep Kit. Those are big projects. And I am just really, there's an entire galaxy, and trying to even boil this down to like one dimension of these things is ridiculous. But we've got to start somewhere. GoFanon, small startup. Apache Mahout, probably more of a mature, but in maintenance mode. It had a big, huge thing before Spark MLib and then Spark ML displaced it in the big data space. Apache Streams was a really cool project, but we didn't have enough interest, and so it got retired. And why I'm talking about this is when you're on large projects like Apache Spark, Kserve, and Data Prep Kit, maintainers normally don't have time to hold your hand and walk you through things. Whereas on a smaller, less popular project, the maintainers are going to be a lot more welcoming and open up to newcomers. That's not to say you can't commit to these, but you need to know what you're doing and have really tight code. And it's a higher bar to entry on these guys than these guys. There's also things to consider, like, is the project foundation owned? The ASF, if you're not familiar with project foundations, and this is hard, I hate doing WebEx meetings because I can't see people in the audience and if people are looking really confused when I say stuff. So I'm sorry if I'm just plowing ahead, but there are, in open source, there are foundation owned projects and there are corporate owned projects, and there's just straight hobby projects. Examples of foundation include the Apache Software Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, GNU, which I think stands for something, but I can't remember what. But they're all foundations. With foundations, usually get really good governance, and they normally, not always, are more community oriented. Then you have commercial projects like MongoDB and Data Prep Kit. And it's going to sound like I'm kind of bashing on Data Prep Kit, and I'm not. I'm just close to it, and it's got a lot of examples that are relevant to what I'm talking about. So MongoDB is just owned by MongoDB. Data Prep Kit is owned by IBM, but they're trying to, we'll talk about this later, they're trying to make it more open and community-based. And then the curious case of Kubeflow. And I mentioned earlier that I worked on the book, the O'Reilly book for Kubeflow. Kubeflow was funny. Google really felt butthurt when they open sourced Kubernetes and it took off and became so popular. They thought they really gave away something super great. And so they didn't want to repeat the mistake with Kubeflow. So it was open source, but it was always Google owned until people kind of moved on and quit caring about it so much. And then they open sourced it to the CNC app, and it's open source now, but it's just a very interesting thing. And there are lots of interesting stories in open source software here, there, and everywhere. And my first open source commit, and I'll click through to it, but the gist of it is there were 37 back and forths. Flink, back when I was doing this, Apache Flink, if you're not familiar with, is a streaming framework started by some Germans that are very good engineers, but terrible business people. But they were just starting their project. I think they might have even, they either were in the incubator still or had just gotten out of the incubator, which is an Apache thing where when you have new projects, they have to start in the incubator to learn how the governance and stuff works. But they needed new contributors. They needed other contributors outside of their core group. And they were very, very welcoming to me. I didn't even really know Scala at the time. And it was before ChatGPT. So my not knowing Scala, producing some pretty gnarly code. We had 37 back and forths. There was another thread before that even. And finally, some guy just took it, cleaned up my PR, and then merged it. So it was a train wreck, but because it was a small startup project that needed other contributors, they gave me that. If you tried doing the same thing now, they probably wouldn't give you, that community wouldn't give you that much runway. Again, it just kind of, it goes back to picking your project. I was going to delete that. Oh, well. Anyway, so politics of free and open source software. Apache Spark, I'm just going to give some examples here. Apache Spark, nominally, I forgot the Databricks is in the AI Alliance. I shouldn't be so maybe disparaging to them, but it's nominally a foundation open source project. In reality, it's a commercial product of Databricks, and Databricks runs their own optimized internal fork. There are a lot of politics around Apache Spark. And again, I just know that one because I was close to it. MongoDB, it's not foundation owned. Any commits you're making to MongoDB, you're really just doing free work for them. Their community is really just an outgrowth of their sales and marketing team. Data Prep Kit, it's IBMers working in the open. They're trying to make it more community oriented. Stay tuned. Kubeflow, as I was saying earlier, it's not foundation owned until it was. And I used to work for a company that was trying to be the Databricks of Kubeflow, but they missed their Series B and that all fell apart. It's exact. There are stories and stories and stories when you get out into the free and open source software world. Apache Mahout. So we've got Krishna's on the call, and he's new to the Apache Mahout project. And I wanted the other main project lead on, but he got in a fight with his boss and decided to take a vacation, go skiing with his kids. So he couldn't make it today. We are absolutely a hobby project, and we are happy to take on new contributors, but you have to understand something about quantum computing to even come out, which is another barrier to entry. And the punchline of why I'm saying all this is when you go and you make a commit to an open source project, especially if you haven't researched what project you're trying to get into, there's 1,001 reasons that PR or contribution may be declined or turned down, and it might have nothing to do with the quality of your code. So it's just why it's important to think the project you're trying to get involved with before getting into it. That gets into what project leads, and now I'm saying all project leads, but I'm saying me. And I'm saying me with I've got multiple hats of different projects I run, and just in general, what I try to look for. When you make your first commit, everyone always wants to make these big features and do these big epic things. And I want to make it very clear that as a project lead, I don't know who you are. I assume you're just some new person who's just trying to get started, and you're doing a drive-by. And a drive-by is slang for a contribution someone makes to a project, but they make that contribution and we never see them again. And that's fine. Drive-bys happen, and a lot of open source software gets done by drive-by, but I don't want your big whiz-bang feature done on a drive-by, because I don't want to maintain your big whiz-bang feature. Especially the bigger it is, the less I'm going to probably understand it implicitly. So when you're starting out, especially in general, I like small patches, small bug fix. I don't know. I should have spell check, or I should have gone through my slides, I guess, one more time. I don't mind them as drive-bys because there's nothing new to maintain. Yeah, there's a lot of typos in this. Wow. But yeah, they don't matter. It's okay that they're drive-bys because it's just maintenance of existing bugs or existing issues. I really never want a big feature dump. You get to do big feature dumps once you're a project lead, and you learn the politics of each project has a different things they go through before doing a big feature dump. But you need to build up karma, which is another slang word, for lack of a better word, for you're building up, you're showing that you're going to be around. You've done a bunch of small batches, you've done bug fixes, and here's the secret: if you really want to get in good with a open source community, start reviewing PRs. Everybody wants to commit code, nobody wants to review PRs, and I'm pretty guilty of this myself. But that is a huge help to open source maintainers. Or you can do small enhancements as long as they're both well documented, good test coverage, maybe something that was already an issue that somebody else was asking for. That is, you didn't open an issue asking for an enhancement and then go do it yourself. That's I mean, you can do it, but again, well documented, good test coverage, and small, please. And getting involved. So free and open source projects are like parties. There are lots of types of parties. When I was in the Army, we had a type of party we called mandatory fun. The boss said, we have to go to this party because that's the rule. You have to go. So, okay, we've got to go to mandatory fun. So you go because your boss says you have to go, and you treat it like work, and it just is what it is. There are the P. White parties that, maybe it's too soon, but it's a party that everyone wants to be at because it's so cool. But the real stuff's happening behind closed doors. You're never going to see it, and if you do get to see it, it's pretty unseemly, and like it's you lose for winning. And there are projects like that like, and those are your big name projects, like probably currently PyTorch would be one of those. The Loyal Order of the Water Buffalo, I'm taking this, that's an old Flintstones reference. It's like fraternal order, just a club kind of thing. You go there because you like the people there. It's really more about the community. You guys, we put out software, but that's really secondary to us, just keeping a reason to keep in touch with friends. And Mahout, the Mahout project like that is like that for me for sure. I was the guy who got mad. I was hanging out with him in Brussels a couple weeks ago, and like we just like seeing each other. We get together once every year or two, and we talk a lot about the project. It just gives us a reason to keep in touch. This is I'm gonna go back. There's Benevolent Despots. That is a open source project. There's usually no foundational oversight, and the Benevolent Despot, you either play by their rules or you get booted, and there's no appeals. It is some person's project. There are a few good ones. An example, there is a project called Bike Lane Uprising. I know the lady who runs it. But it's ran in a very, very strange way. I've committed a little bit to it, but the whole thing is just, it's weird. The Kubeflow community was like that before they donated to open the CNCF. That be careful going to those. There are but some people like that. I mean, you can make friends at clubs and bars. It's just another type of party. There is the house party. That's when some people who already know each other get together just to have fun. It's best to be invited. It can be hard, but not possible to crash a house party. So this was a game that my friend had an idea for that I and a couple of his other buddies, we all just hack on. We get together and do a hack night every once in a while. If you try to make a commit to this, we would decline it because even though it's open source, we're not looking for contributors. It is a house party type of party. Every conceivable party type has an analog open source project type. I'm just throwing these out for illustration that there's different project types. Going back to the earlier punchline that your contribution may get declined for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with your code quality. But why would you want to get involved? So now I've told you all the reasons it can be hard to get involved. Why would you want to get involved? It depends. There's lots of reasons. Maybe your boss said you need to go contribute to open source. Cool. Find an open project, probably a small one, do a drive-by, spell check, commit, fix, call it a day. That's the easiest way. If your boss is telling you have to go contribute to open source, that's the way to do it. Find small projects, fix documentation, commit, boom. It's easy and very, very tiny PRs. Like change 2 lines, do a typo. Your boss says you need 10 commits. Cool. You can knock that out by the end of the day. You want the prestige of having commits on a certain big project. Cool. This is again the white project. You can find some big name projects. Still follow my advice on making very small, manageable pull requests that don't really change anything, but otherwise are just doing some maintenance. After months or sometimes years of doing that, you might get invited to the inner circle. And a lot of times once you get to the inner circle, you'll find that it's a lot. Your stomach may get turned. But that's a reason. This is how I got started, just building your portfolio for when you want to apply somewhere else. When you're sitting in an interview and someone asks you, how do you code or how do you work with others? Like, look, here is a list of my code commits. You can see how I code and you can see how I respond to feedback, and it's all on the open. And thinking of yourself as more like an artist with a portfolio that you're carrying around. Industry networking and making real friends. And this has really probably been the last 4 or 5 years of me and open source. I made a lot of, I started with Mahout. I made a lot of friends just going to conferences and talking about it. And now we toss each other jobs. We take care of each other. It is a very, very community oriented type of thing. Or you and some friends have some fun, cool idea. And you just want to get started on it. Catalina Wine Mixer, that again, spelling error. Catalina Wine Mixer was like that. The Go Phantom project started like that. And I'm going to abuse my house party analogy. It's like a college kegger. And I'm sure not everyone's here is from the United States, but in the United States, when you go to college at a state school, you end up having house parties. And there's some people who just pay their rent by having keggers on Friday nights and charging $5 a cup. So it's a house party, but it's an open invite house party. And that's kind of, I guess, the party type I would say Go Phantom's at the moment. We're hoping to grow it into more of a loyal order of the water buffalo type thing, not a club. We need to figure out, there's things we have to figure out that are above the level of this talk to go into why it would grow into a loyal order of the water buffalo and not a bar or a club, but suffice to say. But how? So different communities have different ways you should get involved. The first thing is a way that absolutely doesn't work. And I always see people do this. They come in with this big, like it's a book of an issue, and they have decided that they are going to implement some huge feature, and they're talking about this and that. And like, dude, I don't even care to read this whole thing. So pass, no. And then they get all mad, like they're a big deal and we should be kissing their rings because they have graced us with their presence. I don't know, and I don't care, no. So don't go in like that. First thing to figure out is, how does the community communicate? Some communities communicate on mailing lists. There's Google groups. There's Slack, the secret Slack cabals. That's that was an old ASF thing, but if they're doing that, that's the white party. And that's the behind closed doors when people are talking about things in the open, but not really. Discords are becoming really popular. Some of these projects, like I said, we just get together for beer on a Friday afternoon sometimes, and we do a little hack session. And different community. So you need to figure out how the community communicates to be involved with the community. Making a small bug fix patch is a good way to introduce yourself. Again, Christian is on the call, and this is, let's see, I'm just gonna click through it. He made a very, very small patch in the documentation, and then we got to talking a little bit more, and he wants to contribute. Okay, join the mailing list. Oh, how do I do that? I'm like, yeah, well, we probably should have made that more clear. But yeah, so I sent him the link. Thanks for the link. I joined the mailing list, and then we set him up with a community call too, which also probably should have been more clear how we did that, but it wasn't. So at any rate, Krishna, A+ for how to join a community. Or sometimes there's an entry path laid out, like Go Phantom, which is a good pivot into picking apart this PR. But let's also talk about Go Phantom. One of the main points of Go Phantom was to make it easy for people to make their first PR. Like not the entire, but like 80% of the reason for that project existing is to let people make their first PR into an open source project. So is Joe on the call?
I am. I'm here.
Okay, cool. All right, cool. So Joe made a PR, and we are going to pick it apart together just to give insight into what goes through the reviewer's head while they're looking at PRs. Joe also works for the I Alliance. Joe, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, my name is Joe Olson. I work very closely with Trevor and Mr. Nielsen and Tim on the AI Alliance. The code commit I did here was specifically for this call. Go Phantom is a new project, and we needed a second committer, so I'm the second committer to Go Phantom. So keep that in mind as Trevor is destroying my PR.
Yes. So the first thing I want to point out is that Joe did is he made he created an issue, and there is a template for how to do this. When you make a new issue, you actually can just do a function proposal template. But Joe filled this out, and he did a very good job on it. And again, this is all just fill in the blanks as you go. Description of it, the use cases, the proposed API interface. We dropped this section. new dependencies you're going to need, where the documentation is going to live. And really, this is just to make sure, again, since we are this entire, one of the major points of this repo is to help people make their first pull request and their first contribution to an open source project. We are giving you guardrails on how you are going to make this issue. And we want to make sure that you've thought about it a little bit before you run off and try to code, because I am just as guilty, if not more guilty than everyone, of code first and then stop and think about it and then do it the right way. So the whole point of this issue template is to just help you think through what you're going to do before you go off and try to execute. So, all right, going through this. All right, description changes. International Space Station, current position. So back, you might think this is a very silly thing, like why would you need this for a function? There is a AWS agent example that uses this, so we decided we just rip it off. And it is and that's fine. You can, any API that you find, you can add an agent, you can add a function for. Nothing's off limits. And again, a lot of this is just making sure that you've thought through everything that you're going to do. And let's get into the code. So the first thing, and this is specified in the PR template, that you added this to the roadmap markdown, just something saying that you added what the API is and then a link to the API with the little emoji saying it's implemented. Cool. And then you add, if it's a brand new API, you start a index page with a link back to the actual function that you implemented. Again, this is all pretty copy paste from the other ones. And then I can again copy paste from the other ones. This is the documentation for the actual function you implemented. Nice, I like that. Okay, so Joe and I talked about this a little this morning too, and the reason we implemented this is, so when you're using this in an agent, you're going to probably want it to return a JSON looking string, and that's because that's what the agents usually are used to seeing back. And then the LLM is going to pick this apart. It knew to make this function call, and it knows that it's getting back the ISS position based on the function call. So it doesn't need a string talking about it. But other use cases, or just to make this easy for reading and looking at, he also said, all right, if it's set to JSON format false, it will just return you this lat long string. There are use cases for both, but I dig this, and returning it as a JSON by default is usually the way to go. So there's no parameters, which makes this easier. And then a very, very simple way to use this in the documentation. And this is not an agentic framework. This is just a standalone function, which arguably is a kind of a silly, like this is a lot of overhead for just doing a very simple REST call, but that's okay. Now, this line, I'm going to start a review. So normally, if you're familiar with Python, in the init.py, you should do this. Because of the way our function registry works, this can cause some issues. I'm going to say drop this line, and I'm going to tag myself. Issue to document why. So since you're here, I will explain why this shouldn't be here. On the function registry, if this line's here, it pretty much it'll automatically add this to the function registry. And there are a lot of cases where you don't need this to be added to the function registry. Maybe you're just doing math, and so you just need some mathematical functions in your registry, or as this thing grows and grows and grows, LLMs tend to get confuzzled if there's more than 5 or 10 tools they can use. So using one of them on where the ISS space station is located is probably not a tool that you're going to always want. So at any rate, but dropping this line will make it so that you don't need, dropping this line will make it so it doesn't automatically get registered. Going back up here, the Go fan. So if this line existed, you could omit this part and just say from GoFan and open notify space, import ISS locator. Interesting. Or something like that. This is the right way. This is how it should be. So this line is correct. Again, just dropping this line and documentation coming soon on why that's important, probably in a more eloquent way than I just attempted to explain it. Moving on. So this is going to be the meat of the function, and in it you are going to, all right, this is the function registry, and this goes back to it being automatically registered. Joe did a really over the top's not the right word, but a very thorough implementation, and I'm very impressed. So he imported something called JSON schema, which validates the schema. And I'm going to also make a note to myself. First, I'm going to, because when you're reviewing PRs, it's good to be nice. Make issue. So telling Joe that this is an awesome ad, and then to myself making a note to make an issue to add this to other tools, because we did this JSON schema. This is the first instance of this. Joe is a better engineer than I am by several orders of magnitude. And we will see that as a recurrent theme through this pull request review. So this is the gist of how this works. And really, if all you needed was this, you could pretty much do it in 2 lines. However, Joe does a lot of validation on both on the response and the numbers on the response, because so when the response comes back, the latitude and longitude are strings. So Joe converts them to floats and then checks that they're legitimate latitude and longitude strings. Latitude can only go from -90 to 90, and negative longitude can only go from -180 to 180, in case you didn't know. So he's doing the verification of the request. He's also doing a lot. This is really cool too, with the just HTTP issues that can happen. And I'm going to make a note to myself. I want to move this functionality to the base class, so all REST-based tools can benefit from it. And this is kind of, I don't want to call it boilerplate, but things that you need a lot. There are lots of HTTP errors that can happen, and Joe has come up with cases for all of them, which again is significantly fancier than I am normally done, but can be moved to a base class and done once, and then everybody just gets it for free. So moving on. So you had to add a dependency to the JSON schema for the validation. He added a testing library, and that's pretty cool. And so now we get into the tests. Joe also wrote a significantly better testing suite than I have written on anything else, with lots of boundary conditions and lots of things. I want to say this can be moved to a base tester class too. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, this was just, I've done this many times. It's just validating that an API call occurred properly and what you got back from the API call is valid. And there's no real science or magic here. This is just based on experience for doing this for many, many years. But yeah, we can certainly elevate it to a higher level in the testing hierarchy, certainly.
And when I'm saying to do this, the idea here is, all right, so here's another thing about open source maintainers in general, especially when whether you're doing it as a day job or a hobby. If you're doing it as a day job or you're just trying to create busy work for yourself, cool, like let's not do that. But as a maintainer who's done enough hobby projects, I want as many things to be as automated as possible so I can spend the least amount of time doing boring maintenance stuff on this as I can, and I can spend most of my time just writing cool new features. Because like I said earlier, I don't want drive-by cool new features, but I like writing cool new features, and I put my time in with this project. So I want to spend my time doing cool new features, not maintenance, or letting maintenance fall through the cracks that will really cause things to fail. And again, this is a very, very nicely done testing suite. Like, I'm just shocked and blown away. Do not let this intimidate you, because the entire point of this call is to make things not intimidating. And this is a very impressive and somewhat intimidating test suite, but we are going to refactor it so that you get all of this for free whenever you do a REST call. That being said, I'm going to go back to the conversation. Oh, shoot, I need to go finish my review. My changes. Awesome. All right. And so even though this was a very, very impressive review, there's still a couple changes that needed to be done, and I will work on those. So now going back, I'm also going to double check the tests. Should be down here. Currently, we only have unit tests and DCO sign off. But the unit tests all passed, which realistically is the first thing I normally would check. Because if the tests haven't passed, like, hey, I don't know, man, you got to go back and fix your tests. But yeah, so that's the gist of managing APR, and I did not leave as much time for Q&A as I was hoping, but let's go to that now. Okay, see in chat. All right, I'm going to
Can I just one comment while you're sorting out the questions?
Yeah, please.
Real quick, this was first contribution to this repository. The only person who contributed to the repository prior to me was Trevor. So this is perfect case of first commit to a new project. Okay, now full disclosure, I've known Trevor for many years, and I've worked with him in many different capacities. So I knew what I was getting into by doing this. The question arose, the whole purpose of this project is to create functions that can be turned into agents for agentic LLM applications, right? So our application here was basically being able to ask the LLM, where is the International Space Station right now? And the LLM would be able to answer, and it would be able to answer because it invoked this function, okay? That's the whole purpose of this. And Trevor's got 6 or 7 other functions in there, calling Google and getting a web page from Google, doing a Google search, archive, GitHub searches. He already had 6 functions in there, and this was the 7th. I just cribbed off the 6 he did to create this one. In order to create an agent to say, hey, let me know when the space station's flying over my head so I can run outside and look at it, that kind of thing. Now, the paranoia on that long is very simple, is I don't know if the function that returns where the space station is, if that wigs out, it returns an invalid longitude. Let's say it returns a longitude of 125, which has to be between -90 and 90 to be valid. If the space station, if the function, the endpoint returns space stations at latitude 125, will the LLM catch that? Will the LLM just broadly rebroadcast what it got from the function call and report that up? And if that's the case, your agent isn't very smart. So I put a bunch of very paranoid checks in because I didn't want a dumb agent on the end of this thing. I didn't know how much I could trust the LLM because of my lack of experience with agentic programming. So that's my spiel, and I'll shut up now. Thanks.
I'm going to go through a couple of these questions real quick. This EYGS person is asking about CUDA, GPU parallel computing playing a big role in AI-related development. As Dave says, it has, because for a while it was the only thing that was. I was at FOSDEM with Joe and our other friend Andrew a couple weeks ago. I think you're going to start seeing it fall off as people start writing more. This is my personal opinion, as you're starting to see more hardware accelerators besides GPUs that are more specified to. A GPU can do a lot of things. Primarily does graphics processing, not deep learning. And you're starting to see hardware accelerators more specifically tuned to generative AI stuff. And as that happens, you're going to see, now if you're talking about wanting to do, you're interested in more low level things. I don't have them on me, but reach out after this and I can go look up some of the projects that we were working with. And there are people that are making GPU accelerators on ARM architecture, on custom hardware architectures, on a lot of really, really cool new things. And I can put you in touch with them and those projects, because you're getting really out toward the razor's edge at that point, but there is a lot of cool stuff happening there. So yeah, I would love to follow up with you offline. Vincent asked, what is a DCO? A DCO, in my opinion, is a really legacy thing that the Linux Foundation was pushing back in 2005 before GitHub had authentication checks. IBM makes us use it, so we use it. I prefer individual contributor licensing agreements, otherwise known as ICLAs. But again, IBM says we have to use DCO. IBM pays me, so here we are. Krishna says, first commit is the first impression in open source. Well, I don't know what RYT means. Anyone? All right, maybe, okay. A first commit can be the first impression. Other first impressions are you go to a conference and you find the person talking about the project you're interested in, and you just go have beers with them. I have gotten involved on a number of projects doing that. Joining the mailing list is another way to make a first impression. So, but a first commit is a very good way to make a first impression, because it shows that you're not just there to talk, you're actually going to do something. As someone who's maintained multiple projects, you get a lot of people who show up on the mailing list, say they're going to do X, Y, or Z, and then you never hear from them again. It doesn't hurt your feelings. It is what it is. But a first commit is a great way to make a first impression, but it is not the only way to make a first impression. Barbara Taylor, what is a PR? Vincent replied pull request. Correct. Oh, no problem. No problem, Lucas. And like I said, everyone feel free to reach out. I probably should have put my email address on here, but I didn't. So let me just do that now. I don't know how to escape. There we are. All right. New slide. I believe I'm Trevor.Grant at the Alliance. And Dave and or Tim or someone, is there a hyphen or is it just
for the email address?
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, the Alliance, no hyphen, thealliance.ai.
Okay, perfect. All right, yeah. So feel free to reach out to me there, and I'm happy to continue conversation with anyone. So yeah.
Great, thanks a lot, Trevor. Let's see, do we cover all the questions? It looks like we did. Excellent. All right, let's see, any parting words?
Contribute to GoFanon, contribute to Apache Mahout QMAT, or some other fun project that you'd like to do. But I will always plug my projects and say, please come contribute.
Yeah, and then one last thing I'd like to say is that we do have our own open source projects, which are right now on GitHub. There's not that many, but we are growing pretty quickly. So I did mention to EYGS, are there any projects you're interested in joining or proposing. And if you have any projects that you'd like to propose to us, you can reach out to us and propose them to us as well. So
I'm seeing another question from, and I'm maybe butchering the name, Akil, about red flags when joining open source projects. Yes, there are several, and don't want to be recorded bad mouthing other projects, because I'm going to reach out to me personally, and I'm happy to talk to you. Yes, there are lots of red flags to look out on open source projects, and the biggest one, in my opinion, is if it's a big popular project. That the big popular projects got big and popular for generally some unseemly reasons, or absolute power corrupts absolutely. It could happen either way, but the bigger the project is, the more people who have heard about it, the more that's a red flag to me to avoid. Case in point, I wrote the book on Kubeflow and I didn't contribute anything to Kubeflow because they weren't not being a foundation-owned project is a big red flag to me as well. And I'm saying that even though GoFanon is not a foundation-owned project, but Dave is working on making a foundation. In the AI space, again, sorry, Lucas, the email address will be on the last page of the slides. I can put it in here too. But in the AI space, again, it's the more you've heard of the project, the more likely it is either going to be a tight ship that it's going to be a tight ship where you've got to be a really A-game player and really know open source contributing to not because they're being mean, just because they don't have time to hold your hand and teach you anything. Or so a smaller project, ideally foundation run, but again, there's degrees of that too. Looking at, so yeah, smaller, sleepier projects, or you're gonna have an easier time. Camillo said most communities are based in the US and have active and odd hours for relative to Europe. Yes, that's true, and it's also true relative to India. However, again, going to smaller projects, we're usually a lot more flexible. Case in point, the community call for Mahout was normally Fridays at like 3 p.m. Central, 1 Pacific. But Krishna wanted to join, so we're like, cool, let's just move it up a few hours, make it easier for him. A bigger project, when everybody lives in San Francisco, they're not going to do that. A small project, when it's a lot more friend-based, yeah, cool, I think we can all meet at 10 and they'll just move it for you. So it's again me saying, to finding smaller, sleepier projects because they're going to be a lot more accommodating. What is meant by foundation run? Again, there is a lot of big foundations. There is the Apache Software Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation, I think IBM made. There are several foundations, and the foundation enforces a governance model. And there are different governance models. PyTorch has a foundation. And you can get into a lot of politics there, and I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot. But when it's foundation run, it means that they enforce a governance. So in the Apache Foundation, you can't have all the project leads work for one company. That is a thing that they make you not, you've got to graduate beyond that before you come out of the incubator. That prevents company XYZ from just using project XY as their personal vehicle. It means that the community is actually driving development. So there are a lot of benefits. There are other benefits to foundation run, and usually, like if you go to the ASF website, the CNCF website, the GNU website, they will tell you what their foundation's philosophy is, and what's better about being on a project in their foundation. And every foundation is a little bit different and has features that differentiate it from the other ones. So just like you have to search for your project, if you're going in with the foundation, just learning about your different foundations and how they operate. And so another derogatory term is pay to play, and I avoid pay to play foundations, and I won't name them here. The ASF is aggressively not a pay to play foundation, but there are pay to play foundations where your company donates $1 million and then they put one of their people on the board. That has conflict of interest as well. So I avoid those. Eric, yes, it will be. I think at the top of the chat, I want to say Dave linked the YouTube channel. And I was asking Tim before everybody jumped on. He said they'd try to get him out within a week. And as far as the slides, Dave, is there somewhere that I can give you the slides? If not, I can put them in the GoFan repo.
Yeah, share the slides with us. You can actually put well, it's up to you. You can just share them with us and we'll send them in the email that we send out to everyone.
I'll probably export them as PDF.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. All right. Yep. So there you go. Then the link in the email.
Great. Okay. Well, we're just about at the top of the hour. I really appreciate you taking the time to give us this talk, Trevor. A lot of useful information in there to help us not just get started, but understand, kind of what the whole thing is about. So thank you for giving that extra.
Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for coming. Sorry to tease all these fun stories, but again, this whole place is start going to open source conferences, and the young and the reference. The young and the reference has nothing compared to the young and the restless has nothing compared to open source software and the Game of Thrones that it is.
Yeah, I used to say, who needs a soap opera?
Right, for sure.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, thanks to everyone else who contributed. Thank you for your questions. It makes it interesting, entertaining, all that kind of stuff. So, we love that. Hope to see you at our next time. And if you have any suggestions for what topics you'd like us to share or find presenters for, please let us know. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.